This is Agriculture Today, and I'm Shelby Varner with the K-State Radio Network. A cattle market update with University of Nebraska-Lincoln livestock economist Elliott Dennis begins today's show as he discusses the current market, trade, consumer confidence, and debt. Justin Waggoner, K-State Extension beef cattle specialist, keeps the show moving as he explains the duty of safety agriculture employees have for their business. He also talks about an upcoming 30-hour OSHA training. Concluding the show is K-State Fisheries and Aquatics Extension Specialist Joe Gerken as he shares what vernal ponds are and what they provide to livestock and wildlife. That and more is coming up ahead. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we start our Monday show with the cattle market update from University of Nebraska-Lincoln livestock economist Elliott Dennis. Elliott, thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Elliott, what are we seeing for feeder prices?
Yeah, really this market this week was either trading sideways or up for most of the cash markets that I've been following. For instance, Nebraska across 5-6 weights really kind of maintained really neutral position, we'd say, just kind of traded sideways. Heavier weights were up a little bit, not terribly noticeable, but even in South Dakota, heavier weights were up a little bit, Washington as well. So for most part, the market's really reflecting kind of these tighter supplies. I think also as we've continued to have import issues from Mexico, kind of pulling the feeder cattle forward as well is kind of been helping that the feeder cattle price kind of come up a little bit. The other thing that we've been really kind of looking at is what's the total number of cows that are going to be on the market. So when we think about the steer price and the heifer price and kind of the price differential, cull cows are still being pulled forward pretty aggressively. That cull cow price is still very, very high. When we look at kind of what's driving that market, still that lean beef market, but just something that I keep watching and kind of wondering when that's going to break. We're still kind of hitting that 50,000 head per week kill federally inspected. Still lower than where we're at, but when we look at kind of where we're at in 2024, it's pretty consistently kind of this time of year that we were hitting that. So if we don't continue to not see that number come down, then it really has strong implications for what the feeder cattle price is going to do this year and then definitely into 2026.
Is this number similar to past years that we've seen?
The cull cow number is down. Last year, around this time of year, we were killing about 60,000 head a week. Now we're down to about a little under 50,000. So a little bit down this year, but there is some week-to-week variation and kind of seasonality throughout the year.
Elliott, what are we seeing for fed cattle?
Yeah, fed cattle, there's two main things that I've been seeing really this week. The first has kind of been I would say the whiplash in the market from just kind of the trade discussions have been going on. I follow the kind of the October markets are kind of the big mark that I've been looking at, and we saw at least this week kind of pretty high or low, and then we were able to rebound and kind of ending out the kind of week on a high note across really all the contracts up to about 195 on the October contract, but really what we're seeing is a lot more variation in the market as prices when we think about kind of potential export bans and higher tariffs are essentially cost of doing business. And then the second thing that I've really been seeing is really just this continue to push weights higher. And as long as we don't see huge discounts on the premiums and discount measures that USDA tracks, I think we're going to continue to see higher weights projected into the fall, and really this has an implication for kind of how much pull we're going to get through from the feedlot going into the summer months.
You mentioned trade, and what are we seeing with trade, Elliott?
Yeah, I think the big conversation that we've been having is just kind of what is the implications for kind of where we're delivering that product, but it's also to give us an idea of kind of where we're delivering those. I mean, so we still have a large presence in Japan, in South Korea, Mexico, Canada, of course, but those are kind of our big markets from actually the finished product. when we look at kind of where we're at, I mean, we're almost doing 50 million pounds a month, really, a month to Japan. And really, we kind of trade off between Japan and South Korea, but South Korea has recently taken over a pretty large measure. We're almost doing 60 million pounds to South Korea. So when we think about kind of where we're at long term, when we think about kind of this trade wars that are going on between China and the U.S., I mean, our large markets are unaffected there. I mean, but China is still at 40 million pounds. They're our third largest trading partner, and really have been since around 2020 when we started trading with them, and it's really been around this 40,000 or 40 million pounds since about 2022, the last part of that year.
Do you know what we usually trade with them?
Yeah, normally it's around 40 million pounds a month. Prior to 2020, when we signed the Phase 1, Phase 2 agreement, we were trading virtually nothing with them, somewhere in the range of about 2 million pounds a year. But a lot of that was coming through kind of what we call the gray markets into China and Hong Kong. But so at least on, from that standpoint, when we look at all kind of these different kind of markets disruptions, I mean, there is some amount there going to Canada and to Mexico. Mexico is about any 30 million pounds a month, and Canada is somewhere in the 20 million. So I mean, it's not inconsequential for the beef market, but one of the reasons why we've been seeing kind of that variability. One of the things that's been helping us has been kind of the resumption of live cattle or imports through the Mexican border. That's really jumped up quite a bit. And I think that's just a huge benefit, and kudos to USDA APHIS and NCBA for trying to, get that back up and running again. We've seen really since, the last part of January, first part of February, that start to climb, and we're at about, 10,000 head a week that we're importing now. That's still a far cry from where we have historically been at this time, which has been about 25,000 head. So I think some of that's been weighing on the market this week, and we're going to start to see kind of that distribution between the cattle that we're importing from Canada start to change as we start to ramp up our imports, our live cattle imports from Mexico.
As you look at imports, any encouragement maybe for extra risk management when it comes to cattle producers?
Yeah, I think just this whole idea of just kind of where the trade market's at, and there's a large amount of uncertainty as far as kind of what's happening with New World screwworm and kind of this ongoing tariff back and forth. I think that's just kind of stand for this year and really maybe for the first couple years of the Trump administration. So I think looking aggressively at risk management will be really important, really in general, but particularly in this year when we have elevated prices and the ability for those prices to move pretty dramatically, $500-$600 a hundredweight within a week.
In a report that recently came out, the Consumer Confidence Report, and what did you see from that, and why do we care?
Yeah, consumer confidence is just a good barometer for us to figure out like what consumers are willing to pay into the market. And so we follow consumer confidence because it gives us an idea of, are people going to purchase beef, for example? And when consumer confidence is going up, they tend to purchase more beef. When it tends to decline or erode, then we see people kind of be a bit more conservative and not purchase things like beef products. It was down about 7 points this past month, but really when we look at it from a long-term perspective, is really we've had this kind of up and down, really plus or minus 10%, really from the second half of 2022. And so really it will go up, a couple months and then come down for a couple months, go up, and it's really been kind of going sideways. That has historically not been the case. When we look kind of pre-COVID, we had pretty strong consumer confidence just kind of keep going back up since 2007, 2008. And so the fact that it's just kind of been middling shows that, consumers some months kind of feel like they're doing well, and some weeks they feel like they're not, or some months they're not doing well. So that has implications for kind of spending and particularly about debt management that they do in their own household.
And as we're thinking about debt and consumers, wanting to mention a few statistics you saw with credit cards.
Yeah, the big thing that we're seeing with credit cards, which is a bit alarming, has been kind of the delinquency rate. When we look at kind of 90-day delinquency, and really what we've seen is credit card debt growing over time. But when we look at kind of total delinquencies, this tells us how many people of their balance is actually 90 days past due. So these are people who are not paying their credit cards for whatever reason. And when we look at where we're at on credit cards right now, delinquency rates, they're about 11.4%. The last time we had that high of rates was in 2012. And so this is, and really from 2012, it started to kind of go down and was somewhere in the 7 percentile. So the fact that over the last really 4 or 5 quarters that it's kind of continually to creep up is somewhat alarming, because if you're not paying credit cards, then it's really hard to get out from beneath that. And just because the high interest rates on those, and we're not at our peak delinquency rates that we had in 2010, which is in that kind of 13% range, but we are kind of on that path, and something that I'm watching for, because as we see that kind of grow, that really shows us that even though consumers may be confident or their confidence is growing, they literally just don't have the capital or the wages to get out of debt. And we know that it eventually affects beef demand. What affects beef demand ultimately impacts prices we're able to receive for cattle along the supply chain.
Elliott, I appreciate you taking the time to join us today.
Yep, thanks for having me.
That was University of Nebraska-Lincoln livestock economist Elliott Dennis. We're cutting to a short break now on Agriculture Today, but we'll be right back. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we continue our show talking about a 30-hour OSHA general industry course with K-State Extension beef cattle specialist Justin Waggoner. Justin, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks, Shelby.
Justin, why do we care about OSHA training?
Yeah, good question. So we started offering at K-State a 30-hour OSHA general industry course a few years ago in Garden City. And this was really an outcropping of an ask that I had from the feed yard industry that said, we know there's this OSHA training. We're seeing it in other organizations. Would you be willing to offer something like that for our employees out here in western Kansas? And I said, yeah, let me check into it. So this is I believe our 4th year that we've done the 30-hour OSHA general industry course for agricultural workers. It's specifically geared towards ag workers. So in my mind, I think about feed yard operations. I think about dairies. We also have a lot of allied industry folks, millwrights, a few other different aspects of the industry that have been really excited about sending people to this course. Oftentimes they're used to having to send their employees away, and then we have lodging, we have travel expenses. And so it's been really a unique aspect of extension to start to offer really an OSHA training with Kansas State University and KSRE.
What is this course? What does it entail?
Yeah, so the 30-hour OSHA course is 30 hours of actual safety training. So this particular training we're going to do in Garden City, and this is a little bit overwhelming. It occurs over 4 days, so it's essentially 4 sessions. We'll get started April 4th. We'll be April 11th. We'll be April 25 and May 2nd. So we do take a break in there for Good Fridays. If you'll look at those dates on the calendar, it's every Friday that starts in April and runs through May, with the exception of the Good Friday holiday in there. And so we're going to be at the Southwest Research and Extension Center in Garden City, Kansas. That's where we've done the training. So it is over those 4 days. It does cost, right? So we've got some material fees and some other things that we have. You have to assign a cost of $100 per person. So that's essentially the training in a nutshell over 4 days. And, we're going to be in Garden City.
And since this is focused towards feed yard, dairy, and agriculture workers, is some of the training and safety focused towards agriculture?
Yes, there's, you can take a general industry course and it can have a lot of different fields depending on the industry that we're working in. We partner with an instructor that spent a long time working in the feed yard industry as well as the oil field industry. So really what that brings is it keeps it very real. The examples that we use as we work with the employees, breaking them into groups and talking about emergency action plans and, just some of the general information that you'd expect to get in a safety course. The examples are all very real world. And I think it's important that we do stress, the agriculture part of it. We oftentimes don't think about agriculture as being a high-risk occupation. One of the statistics that I always come back to that really, I think, makes it hit home for me and maybe some others is, tractors are one of the most common non-highway vehicles that are involved in serious accidents on the roadway. So, we don't think about agriculture often as being a high-risk occupation. The reality of it is that it is, and so safety is really important. I think the other thing that I would stress of why do we do an OSHA course? So, agriculture and our operations come in all shapes and sizes, right? We have, operations that are smaller that may have maybe 1 or 2 employees all the way to much larger organizations, right? And so oftentimes there's this maybe inaccurate perception that, OSHA doesn't apply to agriculture. Certainly agriculture is exempt. Actually, that's not the case. So if we think about just what we call the general duty clause in terms of OSHA regulations, it requires employers to provide a safe workplace free from hazards that could cause serious injury or death to employees. And so, it doesn't really matter whether you have 1 employee or you have 20 employees. That would apply to you as an employer. When you become an employer, there is some things that you need to be aware of, and you have an obligation to your employees. And agriculture isn't exempt. So there's a lot of things we kind of get a pass on. This really isn't one of them. I mean, this is something we need to be aware of. We just oftentimes don't think about it.
For this course, is it just for employees or maybe the employers tag along as well?
Sure. We actually get folks that have taken the course at all levels. It's really become common that the OSHA 30 course is really geared towards folks that I would say are in those mid-level management positions. We do get a lot of, I will call kind of the team leaders within the feed yard or the dairy environments that may be over the milling division or maybe the cattle division. Sometimes even it's a manager, right, that'll take the course. And so oftentimes the OSHA 30 is really geared towards that. But it really fits anyone within the organization, whether you're a new employee or you've been around for 20 years. I think it's really good to come back and get some of that additional training and just learn more about the safety, the regulations. I also think there's a really big benefit to an employer that sends an employee to the training. And so I want to talk about that just a little bit. The benefit to us of sending an employee to a training like this is you get an employee that better understands the role of safety. What is their role as an employee? Ultimately, all of us, as I said here today, I'm ultimately responsible for my own personal safety. So are you when you're in an organization. So, we shouldn't take that lightly. And oftentimes in an organization, we talk about a safety culture and how do we promote that. And that has to be something that when in an organization that we live that safety culture each and every day. And so if we have all of our people are on the same page, they're thinking about safety, they're looking for those hazards that are out there. And there's a lot of them, especially, if you think about a feed yard, you think about a mill, you think about the moving parts. You're on a dairy, we've got folks in loaders, we've got people that are doing maintenance on the ground. There's a lot of risky operations, right? So if everyone is more aware of safety, providing that safety culture, recognizing those hazards that are out there and going, hey, I saw an unsafe situation. How do we fix that? What do we need to do about that? And feeling comfortable taking that to their manager or their supervisor and saying, hey, how do we make this a better place for everybody? Because ultimately our goal should be to send everyone home at the end of the day.
And as you've done this for a few years, what have you seen come from all these people getting together to learn about safety?
Yeah, that's a great aspect of this course. So, really one of the unintended outcomes of this course that I've seen over the years that we've done it is we get people that take the course that may come from a dairy background. We get the millwrights. We've got different feed yards that are represented. We've got different organizations that are represented. Well, oftentimes these discussions become scenario-based. And so there's a lot of discussion of, well, this is how we would handle this at our yard, right? And so they start sharing, what are some of those unsafe situations that we've encountered this is the solution to those, or this is what we have done to fix those things. And so I think there's a lot of growth that occurs within those employees of starting to share across the industry of just different issues that have come up, but also the fixes, right? How did we make that situation better? One of the interesting aspects that I think has come out of this course is some safety awards that I've heard discussed where, there was actually a couple of organizations that were beginning to incentivize employees to come forward and say, hey, if you see an unsafe situation and you can create a solution to this, we're going to incentivize that. And so that's been really interesting to see some of those things start to pop up that, hey, we're going to give this, this safety award or something along those lines, because that's just a great way to encourage people to come forward and start to look for those hazards and try to make the workplace a safer environment.
Justin, what are the registration details for this 30-hour OSHA general industry course?
Sure. So the easiest way to get registered for this course, which I would encourage anyone who is interested, is the seats are limited. We do have a cap on the course. We can only take about 25 to 30 people in the course. So it does fill up very quickly. So just like a lot of our things at KSU Beef, so ksubeef.org is where you can find the registration details. There's a QR code, the short online survey that essentially asks you for your contact information. You can fill that out online. That's the easiest method. Or you can reach me at the Southwest Research and Extension Center, and we can get you signed up for that training as well there.
Where does this take place?
So we will be at the Southwest Research and Extension Office in Garden City, Kansas. Our registration is due by March 28th, so we've got some time here. But like I said, the course does fill up very quickly. So if you're interested in sending folks to the course, I would encourage you to sign up early because it does often fill to capacity very quickly. The dates of the course are April 4th, April 11th, April 25, and May 2nd, 2025. And, of course, once you register, we'll communicate more about those details and where we're at.
What is cost?
So the cost for the course is $100, and that essentially covers the cost of the materials. We're going to be there over 4 days, so there's a fair bit of materials. We do offer a sponsored lunch on the last day where we do some additional training and some on-site surveys. One of our longstanding sponsors of this course has been Hoovie Pharma, so they're just an organization that's been very committed to safety, and we couldn't do this without them. So,
Justin, I appreciate you taking the time to join us today.
Thanks, Shelby.
That was K-State Extension beef cattle specialist Justin Waggoner discussing a 30-hour OSHA general industry course for feed yard, dairy, and agriculture workers that will be taking place at the KSU Southwest Research Extension Center in Garden City. If you'd like to find out more information about this OSHA course, you can do so by going to ksubeef.org. I will also put a link in today's show notes on agtoday.net. We're cutting to a short break now, but we have more for you up ahead. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we conclude our Monday show talking about vernal ponds with K-State Fisheries and Aquatics Extension Specialist Joe Gerken. Joe, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me back.
Joe, what is a vernal pond?
Yeah, we haven't seen many of these lately because we've been in a drought, but a vernal pond, or a vernal pool they're often called, is just an area where the substrate has been compacted. There's bedrock or clay, and you get kind of these little ponds that form from snowmelt or rainwater. They're temporary little ponds that are formed. We see them often in late winter through the spring, and then they dry up when it gets warmer out, so they're going to be completely dry in the summer going into the fall. They're these temporary ponds that show up. They're really important for a lot of wildlife creatures, so I thought we'd talk about them today.
What creature is it most important for?
Well, it's important for a lot of different species, and it's used a lot of different ways. One that comes to mind would be a salamander, so a species like a tiger salamander. There's 9 species of salamanders that are native to Kansas. Salamanders are amphibians that are often found in wooded habitats. They live under old trees that have fallen down, logs under rocks, things like that. So they're hanging out, but they have this cool life history strategy where they go seek out water to reproduce, to lay their eggs, and to have some offspring. And so we see that when they are in the spring, they're looking for a place to go. They'll leave the forest and they'll go find these ponds. And so vernal pools or vernal ponds are very important for those species, giving them a place to go reproduce where otherwise they might not have access to suitable aquatic environments for them to have their offspring.
While they're out and about, do they also eat?
Yeah, they're going to be eating. And so they eat a lot of different critters when they're in their terrestrial habitats. They're going to be eating lots of worms and spiders. When they're in the water, they'll eat aquatic invertebrates. Some really aggressive species like the tiger salamander I mentioned might eat some small fish. And so they're going to, eat a lot of invertebrates primarily. And that's going to vary a little bit depending on where they're at, whether they're in the terrestrial habitat most of the year or they're in these vernal pool type habitats when they're reproducing in the spring.
What is the water quality like usually in these vernal ponds pools?
Yeah, so they're very temporary, and it's going to depend on the landscape a lot, right? And so one of the things we see is where we have high amounts of herbicide or pesticides applied, that can impact the water quality. Salamanders and frogs, other species that are using these vernal pools, can be really susceptible to water quality changes because they're amphibians. They have really thin skin that is, it's made to be able to make exchanges between the body and their environment. And so water quality can be really important. That's something to think about, understanding where these pools might be located on the landscape, and just understanding that, hey, a wet spot on your farm or on your land might have a lot of ecological importance. So something to think about and kind of manage for as you're managing your property.
Could people find a mud puppy in those ponds?
Yeah, so mud puppies are really cool salamanders, and they are an entirely aquatic species. They look kind of gnarly. Their gills are external, and so they look like a salamander, but they have these fiery red gills that are sticking out the side. You probably aren't going to find them in a vernal pond because they're temporary ponds, and mud puppies live their entire lives in the water, or at least a vast majority of their lives in the water. So they're going to be more in like stream environments or permanent ponds. You might find them. They really like flowing water. You'd be more likely to find them in the stream, but really cool example of a type of species that you might find in some aquatic habitat.
As we're thinking about vernal ponds, pools, does it have any other benefits for livestock?
Yeah. So livestock specifically, they're generally smaller. They might provide a little bit of a watering source for livestock if we're thinking about them, but it's going to be temporary. It's going to dry up, right? For wildlife in general, they can provide a lot of habitat, a lot of benefits. And so they can connect different habitats together. They can give an area for deer or a raccoon or a possum, for example, to go get a little bit of a drink as it's meandering somewhere else. Attracts a lot of different diversity. They can be really important. Some, threatened and endangered species can really rely on these temporary bodies of water to be able to complete their life history, reproduce successfully, have places to eat. So they can be really important on the landscape and can help connect really large open spaces by giving these animals kind of somewhere to take a little bit of a break.
Joe, I appreciate you taking the time to join us today.
Thanks for having me.
That was K-State Fisheries and Aquatics Extension Specialist Joe Gerken. That's all we have for you today on Agriculture Today, but we'll be back with more for you tomorrow.